This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. An event that is almost always a joyful expression of New Orleans street culture turned into a tragic example of the city's occasional wild side as deadly gunshots ricocheted during a popular second line event. We will look at both the crime and the tradition. Unfortunately, there would be a second mass shooting later in the week, this one in the French Quarter. It's being described as an ambush. In Baton Rouge, the legislature is racing to an adjournment deadline. By Monday evening, we will know if the governor has reason for his own joy. Part of most celebrations, of course, is music, and while New Orleans has always excelled in performance by musicians, we will look at a local university excelling in music business education. And today's date, November 22nd, is always a reminder of the John F. Kennedy assassination in 1963. We will recall some of the president's impacts on New Orleans during his tenure. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Missy Wilkinson, staff writer, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and LeBron Joseph, news anchor and reporter, WGNO-TV, Channel 26. Missy, we go over to you because you covered the two mass shooting incidents this week. First, a second line, second, a drive-by shooting in the French Quarter. First, let's start with the first one that happened this past weekend. Tell us the events there. Okay, so in what is being described as really terrorizing incidents by our district attorney, there were two shootings that happened at the 9 Times Social Aid and Pleasure Club's second line on Sunday afternoon. The first took place about 65% of the way through the route at Almonaster in the 1800 block. In this, right outside the City Trends and Save-A-Lot, some people opened fire onto the crowd. They wounded 10 people, ranging in age from a 20-year-old boy to a 71-year-old woman. None of those people were fatally struck, but about 45 minutes later, as the parade was crossing the Almonaster Bridge, gunfire erupted again. This time, 2 people were killed, 2 young men, and a third was injured. And police said those shootings are unrelated. It's just tragic. Two separate shootings within 45 minutes about at the same second line. Yeah, and they were about a little less than a mile apart. Were these targeted or just random? I mean, what did the police say? The police haven't disclosed a motive in either of those cases. Actually, all of those suspects remain at large, and so they're keeping it very close to the vest. But looking at the circumstances of this shooting, to the layman, it would appear at least one of them was targeted. The 2 young men who were slain appear to have been killed at fairly close quarters. There's video of some of the aftermath. Police have urged anyone with video of the shootings to come forward. They're still hoping to get tips, but so far there haven't been any arrests in that. And then the end of the week in the French Quarter, another shooting outside of a restaurant there in the quarter. Explain what happened there. Sure. So that was another incident of people opening fire onto a crowd, basically in a crowded public place and kind of the core of New Orleans. It's French Quarter, its oldest neighborhood, just like it's striking at the core of its traditions with the second line. 3 shooters got out of a car outside of Dickie Brennan's Steakhouse and opened fire on 4 individuals. They killed a 27-year-old woman and they wounded 3 other people who are in reportedly stable condition. Nobody was in the restaurant at the time. It wasn't open. But if you go by, you can still see the bullet holes in the door. And those people were swiftly apprehended. So one of them, the shooter, one of the shooters, there were 3 shooters, but one of them was wearing an ankle monitor. And so between that and the surveillance that's heavy in that area and good policing, he was apprehended within hours. Police followed him and made that arrest. And the other 2 have been identified but not apprehended at this point that we know of. Correct. They are at large. They are considered armed and dangerous. We are circulating their images. Police have urged anybody who sees them to call Crime Stoppers anonymously. One of those people is the brother of the person who was arrested for that shooting, and he's
also wanted.
Now, the person who is in custody now for this was wearing an ankle monitor. What's up with that?
Yeah, he had quite a history of violent cases, including a domestic abuse, and he was on probation. Apparently, he was not adhering to the terms of that probation. He wasn't supposed to be out shooting people, obviously. He was supposed to just be going to his job at a car wash. He violated that 40 times between October 3rd and yesterday, according to the district attorney's office. The judge overseeing that case, who was Judge Leon Roche, was notified by email every time this happened. But there's a lot of fingers being pointed right now about it.
Are gangs still a factor, or is this a bunch of guys that just happen to get together and cause trouble?
I think that the question of what a gang is so interesting, even in New Orleans. It's hard to answer that because, gangs can be loosely affiliated people by neighborhood. They can be relatives. And so in this case where it's a targeted killing, maybe it does appear to have been in an area that's somewhat heavy in terms of drug activity, but I think it would be speculative for me to say yes or no.
And so I know the police superintendent was, very present and vocal, and then she was certainly pleased with the speed of the apprehension of at least one of the suspects. But what can be done to try to prevent this?
I think that's the question. That's a really good question, because it's not that those areas are not heavily policed. It's not that they're not heavily surveilled. Every officer was in the district was out for the second line parade. They also hire additional security details from off-duty officers. There were about 100 officers at that parade. Could there be more? Hopefully. The force is somewhat limited. And then in the French Quarter, same deal. Like, we've got state police there. We've got NOPD there. We have security cameras. I don't know how you stop this from happening. It's a hard question to answer.
Well, both the police superintendent and also DA Jason Williams, were lauding the fact that technology has really helped make a quick arrest on the French Quarter shooting.
Yes.
And how potentially this can, help at least solve it. But still, everybody's kind of shaking their heads, wondering how do we take care of this problem?
Well, from your experience, are the kind of people who need to wear monitors, ankle monitors, the least likely to obey that?
Yeah, I have seen it time and time again. I think that we have seen these homicide suspects commit murders while they're on ankle monitors, and it does seem to a normal person that doesn't kill people, like, why would you do that? You're obviously going to get tracked. Your life is obviously going to be over once police find you, but it doesn't seem to deter, and I don't know why that is.
But the fact remains, and you and I were briefly discussing this earlier, there is not an official government agency that actually monitors people with ankle monitors. It's not the NOPD, it's not state police, it's not Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, it's not the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office. The monitoring companies are privately held companies that are, privately owned companies that essentially are contracted by the courts and by these different agencies to assign monitors to people who are assigned, okay, it's cheaper to put you on an ankle monitor than to put you in jail, if you will, with the understanding most times that this person is going to obey what they need to do.
But it seems like such a simple problem. Like Sheriff
Yes.
Norman used to say in Jefferson Parish, it's the low-hanging fruit. Like, hello, the guy with the ankle monitor who's been proven to be a violent citizen.
Right.
He's out where he's not supposed to be. Let's go get him.
That's exactly.
It seems so basic.
That does seem basic. But up until recently, we hadn't even been getting, and a number of the agents were saying that they weren't even getting the violation report that someone was violating or outside of where there should have been with the ankle monitor.
So in this case, we hear that the judge allegedly received an email each time there was a violation, 40 times in about a month's time. So where exactly did that email come from, and who else was being made aware of this? I guess those are certainly questions that remain to be answered about the whole thing.
From the judge to say, okay, I've gotten these emails, NOPD, go get this guy, or this particular agency, go get this guy.
Well, this guy was still on the street,
Yes.
But now is back in custody. All right, Missy, thanks a lot. LeBron, let's take a look at second line.
Yes.
And you wanted to kind of background us a little bit, their history, and then what it's evolved to.
The term second line for us in this city could mean a couple of different things. It's, there is the traditional jazz funeral, which still happens in many parts of town for folks that pass away. My dad, we had one for him 20 years ago when he passed away. second lines in the loose term of, we've got a brass band after the wedding's over, and that's a second line. That's the act of second lining, if you will.
But also some video of this kind of stuff.
Yes, this is Social Aid and Pleasure Club. This is actually the 9-time second line where the shooting took place, but this is not this year. This is actually from 2022. I cover a lot of this stuff and go to some of these second line, shoot video from time to time, know a number of these groups. The Social Aid and Pleasure Club scene, which is what this is, a Social Aid and Pleasure Club. This originates late 1800s, early 1900s, many times as benevolent societies for groups of painters or plasterers or carpenters or whatever. African Americans couldn't get traditional insurance. We couldn't even bury our folks or whatever. There are some of these Social Aid and Pleasure Clubs, some of the older ones like Young Men Olympia, that still bury their members in the crypt right across from Commander's Palace, quite frankly, uptown. So these groups have grown to be, there's been a resurgence. By the way, that is a shot of the bridge. That's how many people are on that bridge when, in fact, that shooting took place. It is one of the big second lines in town.
And there are a lot of them, too.
There are a lot of them. In fact, just about every weekend of the year, with the exception of the Jazz Fest weekends, with the exception of a couple of weekends, Mardi Gras weekends, possibly the Christmas weekend or whatever. But these things, the calendar comes out every year. We spoke to how is security or how is this being paid for. The chief was asked this earlier this week. Yes, a club that is granted a permit for these parades, and there are annual parades that these Social Aid and Pleasure Clubs have every year, is responsible for the traffic controls, which is 8 to 10 officers, some of that, something of that nature, motorbike cops, and a couple of also officers, in the cars or whatever. So that's what a crew that's what these clubs can probably afford to pay for. They are assisted by a fund called the Norman Dixon Senior Fund, which was created many years ago, and that is funded by the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, also the Office of Cultural Economy in the mayor's office, and it's been supported, by a number of administrations, the past few for certain, in terms of helping these groups along, keeping this culture alive. Just to take a step back for a second, we mentioned just as the brass band music, just as that sort of got a resurgence after Danny Barker kept that alive in the late 70s, early 80s, and groups like Rebirth and Hot Aid and the Dirty Dozen Brass Band were kind of kick-started that tradition. It sort of has grown with the brass band culture, if you will. There are probably 150 brass bands in New Orleans now, which is a beautiful thing that our music is spreading that way. It's certainly modernized or whatever, but the Social Aid and Pleasure Clubs have grown as well. And many of them, just as they were benevolent societies and benevolent clubs at the turn of the century, many of them do community services, toys for the kids during Christmas, Thanksgiving turkeys, school supplies for kids going back to school, all very active in the community.
And so, as you said, security is certainly an issue with that, and security is employed with the this past second line in the shootings. There were all of the police officers in the district were on
which the
duty.
club can't possibly pay for, by the way. These districts recognize when, in fact, there are big ones. There's another big one this Sunday, Men in Ladybug Jumpers in Central City. 100 officers. I'm just not sure how you change that without a change of mindset in the culture itself. I can tell you, by and large, for the amount of second lines we have, guys, they're probably some of the safest events we have. Some of the bigger nuisance events we've had, the Mother's Day shooting, which was so many dozens of people were injured there. Big Red was injured, eventually died from that. Back in 2013, you had the Bunny Friend shooting, which happened near a second line in the Upper Ninth Ward. I think 2020 or 2021 or something of that nature. Pretty safe events. But when folks decide they want to do something like this, I'm not sure how you prevent it. It's the million-dollar question.
I know.
The chief was asked this week, whether or not they'll change any plans of how they cover this with security. She said, hey, they're looking at adjustments they can make, but I don't think anybody has that answer, as Missy said,
Just really, really tragic. All
yes,
right.
it is.
All right, LeBron, thanks. All right, something else that's been going on this week, the special session in the Baton Rouge tax session at the legislature. What do they come up with?
Well, we don't know, okay, because as we speak, they're into their final moments. By law or by the procedure in place, the session has to end no later than 6 o'clock Monday, 6 p.m. It could end earlier, but it has to end. And for these final days, when there's a lot of changing and going back and forth, Tyler Bridges, our friend with the Advocate, done good reporting on this, and he reported that I think it was Wednesday. A lot of the House members didn't have anything to do because the staff was still writing things up and figuring out formulas, whereas the Senate was voting. And so on Friday, they expect a lot of these things to come to a vote, but who knows, they could change over the weekend. But in an interview with Senate President Cameron Henry, what he seems to be saying for sure is going to happen is that the big thing has always been the thing about the graduated income tax, getting rid of that and replacing it with a flat tax at 3%. So that would be
For individuals, yeah.
That would be a big change, and it seems like that's going to probably happen. There's also a corporate tax that they're going to reduce, and also the standard deduction will be tripled. So there's some things that seem pretty good there. Okay. Now there's also be some losses though in doing that too. And it looks like it's going to be an increase in sales tax, going up by 5% a year. And Louisiana already has a pretty high.
We already have the highest in the nation.
Right.
Yeah,
So, I mean, we had that 0.045 or 0.45, whatever
Yeah,
it
now
was.
it's going up to 5.
Yeah, now it's going up
next
to
5
5, so
years.
we'll have 5 cents.
Yeah, and what we still don't know yet is the favored corporate exemptions, like the movie tax and if you're doing work on your home and that sort of thing. We haven't heard the final thing.
Historic tax credits and movie tax credits.
So we don't know about all those things. And so it's coming down to the wire, but by Monday it'll be finished.
Okay, we'll see what they come up with. All right, thanks a lot, E. Don, over to you, because there's a really quite recognized School of Music Business, is it, at Loyola University?
Yes, it is the School of Music and Theater Professions at Loyola University, and for the 4th year in a row, Billboard magazine has recognized it as one of the leading music business schools in the country, and in fact the world. It ranks up there with Abbey Road Institute in London, NYU in New York, UCLA, Belmont in Nashville, and they are churning out not just performance musicians, but musician business people who are coming up with the next great ideas, using AI, using computerized tools to be music professionals. And what this is saying is Billboard magazine recognizes not just Loyola, but New Orleans as a place where people really can learn the music business. And the students at Loyola get a whole lot of hands-on. They intern during French Quarter Fest. They work in bars and venues and places where they're sound mixing. I spoke with Loyola today. They say this is really a confirmation on a yearly basis, now 4 years running, that what they have is a substantive program, that it works, it attracts the right people, it's attracting the right resources, getting on that notable list with those other universities. And they are able and have been able to pivot and create new curriculum every single year. One of the music professors I talked to said she jokes with her friends in the English and history departments, like, how often do you have to throw out and rewrite your whole syllabus because the law changed or technology changed? Probably not very often, but in the music business department, they're doing it every 6 months or more.
It's a beautiful change, Dawn. I'm sorry to cut you off, because when we think about the music here in New Orleans and the music that we turned out in the heyday of New Orleans R&B, some of those artists, James Booker and, some of these guys that made these great songs, Fats Domino did very well for himself, but there were other artists and so many others that performed and made songs and all that. And these guys died broke, and many of them lived in squalor towards the end of their lives. The work of Jan and Offbeat screaming into the cavern
Jan
for years, saying,
and Joseph Ferreira.
We need a music industry, something here.
Yeah, that's how that was her focus as she started that magazine, was building that music business infrastructure, which still needs to strengthen. I mean, the school is great, but we still need to grow it.
Well, and they're working on that. On the Loyola end, they're working to make sure their technology is industry standard, and that is constantly changing. They're also working on legislation and revenue streams. One of those ideas are tax credits, not just movie tax credits and not just historic renovation tax credits, but tax credits for people who are going to build up the businesses that employ these musicians. Also, digital resources. They have the big Dolby surround studio there that is, better than anything you can get in the industry, so that we can keep our people employed, we can keep them here. The students who come in, though, aren't all from here. A lot of the music industry demographic at the school is both West Coast based and East Coast based, not necessarily Louisiana based. So they're kids who ultimately maybe go home and do their business. They're hoping to keep more of them here. You know, they've got to teach these kids everything from the actual music business to being able to preserve their rights to their own royalties and how to collect them and how to track them. And I mean, it's a whole lot more than produce some music.
Yeah, it is. And publishing is a really big part of it, too.
And then GNO Inc. is involved, too. And with incubator businesses, Metronome is a music business accelerator through GNO Inc. that's hoping to grow more music businesses. And they say, you know, this solidifies us as a hub for music. It is another industry that's a good paying one.
Yes.
That has leaps and bounds to grow and can continue to grow. And there's an ecosystem that's coming to support it, that's continuing. It's, you know, hopefully.
Beautiful to see.
Hopefully the music keeps playing, but that the people playing it can be rewarded.
Can make a nice, healthy living. Yeah, right. And you know, grow the New Orleans, once again, music business infrastructure. And also kudos to Jan and to Joseph. They're now going to retire after a long time.
Yes.
So, you know, decades of really, you know, blood, sweat, and tears, a passion. And they've really given a lot to the community. So they're retiring, and hopefully Offbeat will continue. And she has an archive that's going to be just a treasure.
And there is, before the first of the year, there will be what they're calling an extended classroom, which is a huge partnership between a large music institution in New Orleans and the students here at Loyola. They won't tell me who. They say, you know, the 2 Hilton endowed professorships and a large music industry presence in New Orleans are working together, and it's going to be a large announcement later this year.
Exciting, definitely exciting. All right, Don, thanks a lot. All right, a significant anniversary today, November 22nd, 1963.
Before that, early in the life of Gambit was in a building in the French Quarter. And the building we worked in had been a studio, Cosmo Metastas, studio. And the room where the production was where Little Richard recorded Tutti Frutti.
Tutti Frutti, yeah.
So I worked in that same room, okay? This anniversary just brings to mind when the Kennedy time. And during his short tenure, I mean, he had an impact on New Orleans. The most famous was May 4th, 1962. When he came to New Orleans, and it was a big deal. He came to town. I mean, there was so much Kennedy excitement. This is him right there. I think that's the City Hall. That's Governor Jimmy Davis to his left, to our right. And he had several missions that day. One was to go to dedicate the Nashville Avenue Wharf. That opened that day. He also made a speech boosting the space program, which of course he was all behind, which was very important to New Orleans. And he also talked about international affairs. But anyway, that's him at with the governor. Also, we have this. I love. It's a little bit fuzzy, but to the far left of the picture, you can barely see Kennedy right there. His procession passed by Xavier University, and the guy in the white suit in the car is Mayor Vic Schiro, and behind him is Governor Jimmy Davis. I love if you look in the back of the nuns and their classic habits. But that was a big deal from the path to Xavier. And it reminds me, many years later, when John Paul came to town, he actually went to Xavier and went in and actually gave an important talk about diversity in the religion. And then there's one other thing, and so that was a happy day. That was May 4, 1962. And then this was the day after the assassination, the New Orleans State tried them. And a New Orleans man charged with the murder. Of course, that was Lee Oswald. New Orleans' name came up many times in the whole history of investigating it. Oswald was born in New Orleans and went back and forth to school. And then later, when all the conspiracies started, none of which have actually been proven, but the New Orleans Mafia and all that.
The New Orleans DA very much involved also in the.
Jim
Garrison.
It was Jim Garrison who implicated.
Well, Oswald didn't live to tell his side of the story, obviously.
But if anybody is watching and they were alive that day of the assassination and trying to remember where they were, I can tell you right now, you were in school, okay? Because it was a Friday. The assassination happened at 12:30 Central Time in Dallas. And so all the school kids, they were either at lunch or in the or
Yeah.
in a mission or something after that.
Yeah, I was in school at Archbishop Chappelle and Sister Frances Therez's English class. I remember it very well.
Wow.
And getting that word over the over the PA, it was devastating.
And one thing I want to mention, another major impact is we saw Mayor Skiro. The reason Mayor Skiro was mayor at the time was because Mayor Morrison had resigned because he was a 4-term mayor. He had resigned because Kennedy had appointed him an ambassador.
That's right.
Ambassador to the Organization of American States. Morrison was there, but as an ambassador. So he really had an impact on our politics, too.
And if you remember seeing in those pictures, it was a convertible.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Looks like the
open-air
same shot
convertible.
you see from
Yeah,
when he
you
was.
look at the scenes.
Driving really, really close to the crowd.
Yeah. You look at the scenes, it reminds you exactly of Dallas. It could have even been the same convertible because it was like about a year apart, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a very loving thing. I remember people lined all along St. Charles Avenue.
Yeah.
They were very
Well,
excited.
the motorcade went out airline highway at that time to the airport. I lived near there, and our mothers walked us up, and
Wow.
we were, no farther than the length of this
Mardi Gras
table away
parade.
from the car. He was in it, waving to us and brushing his
I had a
his
friend
hair.
who was in
remember
a
it
high school
vividly.
band, and they were along St. Charles. And as the president passed, they were playing music, and the band director turned around. He saw Kennedy. He told the band, "See ya," and went to see Kennedy. He left the band playing on its own. So anyway,
Yeah, a good memory. But then, of course, today is a anniversary of a real tragic day in our history. All right, E. Thanks. Other stories. Over to you.
okay. December 7th is Election Day. Do not get up early to avoid the lines because there probably won't be anybody, okay? This is an election that's described as the congressional runoff day to handle all the congressional runoffs. There are no congressional runoffs in Louisiana. So what we have is some miscellaneous campaigns. I think 1 school board runoff, 4 constitutional amendments, if that excites you. And then a couple of, like, the town of Amite will be electing a mayor in a runoff. And so not a big election day, but an election day nonetheless. So December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day.
Okay, all right,
Okay.
thanks. Missy.
So the New Orleans Police Department seems very close to entering a sustainment period of step-down monitoring after being under a federal consent decree for more than a decade. The comment period on that has been extended. We're going to be looking at people's reactions and thoughts, which are quite polarizing on that topic.
All right. Don?
Ready or not, the season is here. Canal Street and Convention Center Boulevard will be lighting up with their holiday lights on Tuesday. The mayor and others will be flipping the switch at 5:30 on Tuesday.
All righty. All right, LeBron.
Kind of quietly, the city council banned the release of Mylar balloons, which is a very interesting deal. You can still possess them. You can still have them at memorials and all, which is not at all what places like California has done in banning the production of them and the sale of them altogether. There is some criticism because some folks feel we could have gone farther. Councilman Geruso says, hey, we don't want to demonize folks for memorials or a child who releases a balloon or something like that. However, this is at least a step in getting us to catch up to some of the rest of the cities
Because
around the
those
country.
Mylar balloons have caused power
Knock
outages.
out
You
the
saw one
power.
the other day at a memorial
Yep,
service.
just Tuesday for the Almanaster victims at
Yes.
Data Transformer.
Yeah,
there you
so
have it.
we can't release those Mylar balloons. That's all
Thank
there is
you.
to it.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks a lot for joining us around this table. Thank you all for joining us, too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.